Welcome to the Whisper newspaper channel. The Azovstal commanders are back. Turkey allowed Ukrainian commanders to return to their countries. Officials in the Kremlin were shocked by the return of the Ukrainian commanders. Tensions between Turkey and Russia escalated. Azovstal commanders ready to return to war. The Azov regiment commanders, recently released from Russian captivity, declared that they were ready to return to battle. The regiment's commander, Denis Prokopenko, told Ukrainian news outlet Envy that he and his men are ready to return to the front line and continue to fight for our country. Prokopenko and other Azovstal commanders were released from Russian captivity last month in a prisoner exchange. They had been held captive for more than 3 months after defending the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol against Russian forces. In the interview, Prokopenko said he and his men are still recovering from the ordeal of their captivity, but are determined to continue to fight for Ukraine. He said the Azov regiment was ready to take on any challenge and confident in our victory. The statement of the Azovstal commanders boosted the morale of the Ukrainian army, which is currently in fierce conflict with Russian forces in the Donbass region. The Azov regiment is a highly respected unit in the Ukrainian army, and its members are considered heroes for their defense of Mariupol. The return of the Azovstal commanders to combat will most likely be a significant psychological blow to the Russian army. The Russian government is trying to portray the Azov regiment as a group of separatists, but the return of the commanders to the battle will show that the regiment is a legitimate part of the Ukrainian army. The declaration of the Azovstal commanders is also a sign of the determination to continue the fight for the independence of the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army suffered heavy losses in the war, but showed remarkable endurance. The return of the Azovstal commanders is a sign that the Ukrainian army did not give up and was determined to win the war. The declaration of the Azovstal commanders is a significant event in the war in Ukraine. Morale for the Ukrainian army is a psychological blow for the Russian army. The return of Azovstal commanders to the war is also a sign of the Ukrainian army's determination to continue fighting for its independence. The Azov regiment is a highly respected unit in the Ukrainian army. It is seen as a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, and its members are seen as heroes. The return of the Azovstal commanders to the war is a reminder of the strength and determination of the Ukrainian army. This statement of the Azovstal commanders is also an indicator of the determination of the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian people have shown remarkable resistance to Russian aggression. The return of Azovstal commanders to the war is a sign that the Ukrainian people have not given up and are determined to win the war. The declaration of the Azovstal commanders is a significant event in the war in Ukraine. Morale for the Ukrainian army, a psychological blow to the Russian army, and a demonstration of the determination of the Ukrainian people. On the other hand, the Russians are struggling with unmotivated missions, while the Ukrainian army prepares for a major offensive in Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces have launched a new offensive on the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, and there are reports that Russian troops are struggling with demoralization. The attack on Bakhmut is part of a wider Ukrainian offensive in the Donbass region, where Russia has focused its efforts in recent weeks. Bakhmut is a strategically important city, and its capture would give Ukraine a significant advantage in the Donbass. There are reports that the Russian troops in Bakhmut were demoralized and exhausted. They have been fighting for months and have suffered heavy losses. They also face stiff resistance from rooted Ukrainian forces in the city. The poor morale of the Russian troops is a major concern for the Kremlin. It makes it difficult for the Russian military to conduct effective offensive operations. It also increases the likelihood of Russian troops capitulating or deserting. The attack on Bakhmut is an important development in the war in Ukraine. It shows that the Ukrainian army still has the ability to launch offensive operations and put pressure on the Russian forces in the Donbass. The demoralization of the Russian troops is also an important development. This is a sign that the Russian military is struggling and could make it harder for Russia to achieve its goals in Ukraine. There may be several reasons for the low morale of the Russian troops in Bakhmut. First, they have been fighting for months and inflict heavy casualties. Second, they encounter stiff resistance from the well-established Ukrainian forces in the city. Third, they are aware of the poor performance of the Russian army in other parts of Ukraine. The poor morale of the Russian troops makes it difficult for the Russian army to conduct effective offensive operations. It also increases the likelihood of Russian troops capitulating or deserting. It is important to note that the poor morale of the Russian troops is not necessarily a guarantee of Ukrainian victory. The Russian army still has a significant advantage in terms of firepower and manpower. However, the low morale of the Russian troops may make it difficult for Russia to achieve its goals in Ukraine, and it may also lead to an increase in desertions and surrenders. This causes the Russians to lose huge amounts of military equipment and armored vehicles. As you may recall, the Wagner terrorist organization chief Prigozhin said that the Kremlin lied, that about 1,000 Russian soldiers were neutralized every day. Russia's tank collapse in Ukraine has started. Russian attacks on Ukraine proved costly for the Kremlin, with the Russian army suffering heavy losses in both personnel and equipment. One of the most significant losses was the destruction of a significant number of Russian tanks. According to the latest estimates, Russia has lost more than 2,000 tanks in Ukraine since it began the offensive. This is a staggering figure and represents a significant blow to the Russian military. Tanks are a vital part of any modern army, and their loss will make it much more difficult for Russia to achieve its goals in Ukraine. There are several reasons why Russia lost so many tanks in Ukraine. One reason is that the Ukrainian military is using Western-supplied anti-tank weapons such as the Javelin and Enlo missiles, which are very effective against Russian tanks. Another reason is that the Ukrainian army uses more effective tactics such as ambush and hit-and-run attacks, which makes it difficult for Russian tanks to act effectively. The loss of so many tanks is also a sign of the general decline of the Russian army. The Russian military is plagued by corruption and demoralization, and cannot adapt to the rigors of a modern war. As a result, the Russian army was unable to reach its targets in Ukraine and is likely to continue to suffer heavy losses in the coming months. The loss of so many tanks is not just a tactical setback for the Russian army. It is also a strategic setback. Tanks are a symbol of Russian military power, and their loss will be seen as a sign of weakness. This could further lower morale among Russian troops and make it more difficult for the Russian army to reach their targets in Ukraine. The loss of so many tanks also has consequences for the future of the war in Ukraine. This means that the Russian military will be less capable of launching offensive operations and more vulnerable to counterattack by Ukrainian forces. This could lead to a stalemate in the war, or even a Ukrainian victory. The loss of so many tanks is a major blow for the Russian army and a sign of the overall decline of the Russian army. It could also be a strategic setback and have a significant impact on the future of the war in Ukraine. The loss of so many tanks is a major blow for the Russian army and a sign of the overall decline of the Russian army. It could also be a strategic setback and have a significant impact on the future of the war in Ukraine. We will continue to report the events in the coming hours to you quickly and accurately. We continue to inform you objectively about the events. You can like the videos to support us. You can also subscribe to the channel to make it easier to follow new videos. I wish you all happy days. See you later.